For years, Venezuelan politics appeared frozen. The same faces, the same power structures, the same names repeating in different roles. And then, suddenly, one figure moved from the background into the very center of power. When Delcy Rodriguez emerged as Venezuela's new president, many observers asked the same question: how did this happen so fast? Officially, the transition was presented as legal, orderly, and constitutional. But behind the public statements lies a much more complex story, one shaped by internal power shifts, international pressure, institutional design, and years of quiet preparation. Today, we're breaking down 5 secrets behind Delcy Rodriguez's sudden rise to the presidency, factors that were rarely discussed openly, but which made this outcome not only possible, but in many ways, inevitable. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a power analysis. The first secret is the biggest misconception of all. Delcy Rodriguez did not rise suddenly. Her public visibility may have surged overnight, but her power trajectory spans more than a decade. Long before becoming vice president, Rodriguez held strategic roles that placed her at the intersection of law, diplomacy, and executive authority. As foreign minister, she became one of the regime's most recognizable international defenders, developing direct working relationships with allies, adversaries, and negotiators across Europe, Russia, China, and the global South. Crucially, she learned how to absorb pressure without collapsing politically, a rare skill in sanction-heavy environments. By the time she became vice president, she wasn't a junior official. She was already operating as a coordinator of state power, managing crisis response, energy diplomacy, and internal messaging. In other words, when the moment arrived, she wasn't stepping up. She was already standing there. The second secret isn't personal. It's structural. Venezuela's constitution creates a clear succession pathway that heavily favors the vice presidency in moments of executive disruption. When political instability, absence, or incapacity emerges at the top, the system does not improvise. It defaults. And Delcy Rodriguez occupied the exact institutional position designed for that moment. This matters because transitions that look dramatic from the outside often feel procedural on the inside. To state institutions, this wasn't a coup, a takeover, or a revolution. It was a handover. That legal continuity was critical for maintaining bureaucratic loyalty, military alignment, international recognition channels. Without it, chaos becomes contagious. With it, power changes hands quietly. One of the least discussed dynamics in authoritarian or semi-authoritarian systems is trust compression. As regimes age, leaders trust fewer and fewer people. By the final years of Nicolas Maduro's leadership, internal trust had narrowed dramatically. Competing factions existed within the political elite, the military, and the economic apparatus. But few individuals were trusted across all of them. Delcy Rodriguez was one of those few. She functioned as a bridge between civilian leadership and military planners, a mediator between economic technocrats and ideological loyalists, a reliable executor rather than a charismatic rival. That last point is key. She was not perceived as a threat to the system, but as a continuation of it. In moments of uncertainty, power systems don't choose the boldest figure. They choose the safest pair of hands. Here's a paradox few people understand. Sanctions don't just isolate governments. They restructure internal power hierarchies. Under years of international sanctions, Venezuela's leadership needed individuals who could navigate financial restrictions, conduct indirect diplomacy, maintain external channels without formal recognition. Delcy Rodriguez became one of the regime's primary sanctions managers. She worked on energy negotiations, humanitarian carve-outs, back-channel diplomacy. This transformed her from a political figure into a logistical necessity. When access to the outside world is limited, those who can still open doors become indispensable. By the time leadership transition became unavoidable, removing her would have meant cutting off critical external lifelines. So instead of being sidelined, she was elevated. The final secret explains why this transition didn't trigger immediate internal collapse. Delcy Rodriguez does not represent a break from the system. She represents stability through continuity. Her presidency reassured the military that command structures remain intact, the bureaucracy that institutional roles will be preserved, allies that existing agreements will be honored. Revolutions create uncertainty. Transitions create anxiety. But managed succession creates compliance. That was the objective. Her rise wasn't about popularity. It was about containment. Delcy Rodriguez's presidency wasn't a surprise event. It was the outcome of long-term positioning, constitutional design, internal trust consolidation, sanctions era necessity, and a system prioritizing survival over transformation. Whether her leadership marks a new phase or merely extends the current one remains an open question. But one thing is clear, this wasn't sudden. It wasn't accidental. And it wasn't improvised. It was prepared, quietly, patiently, and deliberately. To understand what Delcy Rodriguez's presidency will actually look like, you have to understand one final dynamic: her relationship with Nicolas Maduro himself. Delcy Rodriguez is not an outsider who defeated Maduro politically. She is not a rival who replaced him, and she is not a reformist who emerged against his will. Her rise was inseparable from his approval. For years, Rodriguez operated as one of Maduro's most trusted political executors. Not a public successor in waiting, but a system stabilizer. She handled crises that required discretion rather than visibility, loyalty rather than ambition. That relationship matters because it defines the limits of her independence. Rodriguez does not inherit power as a revolutionary leader. She inherits it as a custodian. This suggests that her presidency is unlikely to dismantle the core architecture of Maduro's system. The security services, the military hierarchy, the ruling party structures, and the sanctioned economic networks are all expected to remain intact. However, continuity does not mean stagnation. Where Maduro ruled as a symbolic figurehead with diminishing maneuverability, Rodriguez is expected to operate as a manager-president, focused on coordination, survival, and negotiation rather than ideological performance. Her style is expected to be more technocratic than charismatic, more transactional than rhetorical, more internationally pragmatic than publicly confrontational. In short, less about speeches and more about control. That also means expectations should be tempered. There are no clear signals of dramatic political liberalization, rapid democratization, or systemic reform. Any change that does occur is likely to be incremental, reversible, and framed as necessity rather than ideology. Rodriguez's presidency is best understood not as a new chapter, but as a reformatting of the same book. The cover may look different, the tone may shift slightly, but the story remains constrained by the same power realities. And that, perhaps, is the final secret. Delcy Rodriguez was not chosen to transform Venezuela. She was chosen to hold it together. Power doesn't always change hands through confrontation. Sometimes it transfers through preparation. And in Venezuela's case, Delcy Rodriguez's presidency is less a moment of rupture and more a moment of calculated continuity. If you want more deep-dive political analysis that goes beyond headlines and into power structures, consider subscribing. Because the most important decisions are rarely announced loudly. They are arranged quietly.